Hey everyone, it's Steve from the garden. In this week's worm check-in, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of just checking the feeding area in the bin, I want to do an evaluation of the worm population itself and its potential for growth in the near future. So let's go take a look. Let's check on these worms and see what's happening. So right away we can see we got more bean sprouts coming up. There's no worms on the paper. So we got plenty of growth activity with these bean sprouts. And I'm just gonna check to see if there's any of the little nitrogen nodules that will form on beans. I don't really see any on here. Check another one. Okay. Well, let's take a look at the feeding area. I fully expect this to be 100% gone. And I do not see, oh, there is a little bit of food left on this one. Then we got a worm feeding activity there. So those are in the center. There's just a little bit of food left over. And now we did give them kind of a big feeding last week. But this gives us one way to evaluate our worms, is that they're all bunched together. And we can kind of evaluate how old they are as to whether they're young or juveniles or, adults. And one way we do that is if we see that they have their, I forgot what it's called offhand, but their reproductive organ there. And so we have a mix of age population here, from little ones like this one here, to that little one that's on my glove there. What I want to do next is I want to take 2 handfuls of the bedding and mix here, and we'll look to see if we have cocoons, and if so, just do like a rough count of how many we see. Okay, so we got our sample. I'll move some of the beans and stuff out of the way here, and we'll start seeing what we have. Now, right away I can see, camera probably won't pick that up, but there's one. I'm not going to go through and count these one by one. I just want to get just a rough idea of what the worm population looks like and how many cocoons, just rough count that we have. Okay, I pulled out a bunch of the worms so we can take a look at them. Now what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of immature worms in here. Now we've got that one right there I just had. Well, that's a mature one, but I am seeing a lot of juveniles and very young worms in this mix. Now I didn't go through and count this, but if I was to just do a rough estimate, I would say there's at least probably a couple hundred right there. And this is only a small sample of the bin overall. Now in terms of cocoons, I counted like 6 or 7 of them in this handful. And I don't have my glasses on to look for like fine detail type stuff. Here's another one. So I'm sure there's more in here that I'm just not seeing. But let's go ahead and put these worms back in and we'll do this week's feeding. And looking at the worms, I noticed that in the feeding area I had more of the mature worms in that area, but in my sample size I had a lot more immature worms. Now it might be just that in the sample area, I'm doing a more detailed look at them and I'm seeing a lot of the small ones, and maybe when I did my quick look at the feeding area I just didn't notice the small ones as much. But if that's the case, I'm going to need 4 to 6 weeks before these worms reach maturity age and they can start reproducing. That'll put us into like mid-January to late January before they reach reproduction age, and then end of February before the cocoons hatch and they start producing more worms that way. Now, if my sample size is representative of the bin as a whole, it tells me that I have no less than 1,000 worms in that bin right now, and it could be I don't know, 2,000 maybe, a little bit more in the whole thing. I'm certainly not going to sit there and count them all out. That'd be way too tedious to do. But it does represent that, I have a good healthy population in there, and it should be growing pretty well by the time summer rolls around, and I can take some of the worms out and put them into my compost piles to help break those down. With the worms back in the bin, let's do the feeding on this side today, since there's still a little bit of food left there in the middle. Dig out a little spot here for them. Some of these bean sprouts on the bottom. Now this week's feeding is going to consist of some carrots, potatoes, potato skins, sweet potato skins, lime, onion, and for grit I'm going to do something a little different in that I am going to add some azomite, which is a powdered rock and has a consistency that's similar to flour. Now azomite has minerals, and so by adding it now it provides the worms with grit, and it'll add those minerals later on to the garden soil, or what will be castings at one point. Alright, there we go. Alright, let's cover up that feeding zone. And we'll call that a wrap for this week. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.